Yes, indeed, this happened. Canada was celebrating not a neo-NAZI, but an actual NAZI. And here is the story of Canada's embarrassment. Oh, Canada, oh, Canada. A Nazi-linked veteran received an ovation during Zelensky's Canada visit. The House Speaker apologizes for leading a tribute in Parliament. This initiative was entirely of my own. That's a lie, and I'm going to show you in a bit. But the report says that a ranking Canadian parliamentarian is apologizing to Jewish communities around the world for a blunder during Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky's visit that led lawmakers honoring a veteran belonging to a Nazi division in World War II. It followed demands by Canadian Jewish organizations Sunday for an apology after it was revealed members of parliament across party lines awarded a 98-year-old veteran on Friday with a standing ovation after Zelensky addressed Canada's House of Commons. Yaroslav Hunka stood and appeared to salute from the public gallery when he was recognized by House Speaker Anthony Rota, who introduced Hunka as a Canadian-Ukrainian war hero from his political district. We have in the chamber today a Ukrainian-Canadian veteran from the Second World War who fought for Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at the age of 98, said Rota on Friday, followed by a lengthy round of applause and a wave by Zelensky. He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service. Thank you. And there's Jewish groups who opposed it. Of course, these are Zionist groups, the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center, the B'nai B'rith. These are Zionist groups. But nonetheless, the point is clear. And I want to pull up DD Geopolitics, and I want to give them a shout out, first of all, not just for this incredible tweet that I'm going to show you that actually demonstrates this celebration, but also for all of their support of my work. The thumbnails that you see, there are folks over at DD Geopolitics who are helping out with that. And so I have to just give them a quick shout out before I show you their coverage of this, which I found actually, and we're going to see the video now because Politico was not trying to show you the video of this embarrassing situation. So here is the report, okay? So listen to this reporter commenting on Zelensky's visit to Canada. Then listen again, and something will feel a little off. That's because she says the veteran receiving the standing ovation fought against the Russians in the Second World War. Yes, because the 98-year-old veteran is Yaroslav Hunka, who fought for the 14th Division of Waffen SS. So let's have a...
Zelensky's speech received at least a dozen standing ovations. There was also one for this man, a 98-year-old Ukrainian Canadian who fought for Ukrainian independence against the Russians during the Second World War. Zelensky's speech received at least a dozen.
So fought against the Russians, they say. That's what Canadian media, mainstream media, had to say about this. And yes, of course, fought against the Russians. Yes, fought against the Soviet Union. Yes, because that's because the NAZIs were fighting against the Russians for their fascist project. And Yaroslav Hunka was a part of the 14th Division of the Waffen SS, which in this case was the Ukrainian division of the Nazi regime. So here, DD Geopolitics continues, the plot thickens. Turns out he is also one of the contributors to this book, Canada Going Full Banderistan 2.0, and he was a contributor to the history of the Galician division of the Waffen SS. And so, and then you can see here, Yaroslav Hunka was a contributor to this book. And we go on and on and on to show kind of Canada, how Canada has been a supporter of fascism for quite some time, and even into today, where they still have in a monument here, the cenotaph at the Vladimir Ukrainian Cemetery in Oakville, Ontario, is flanked by flags and set on a small paved plateau. Few Canadians may be aware that this memorial commemorates a major battle fought by the 14th Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS, a unit formed in 1943 and made up mostly of Ukrainian volunteers that fought against the Soviet Red Army during the Second World War. And so here are images of this division that Yaroslav Hunka was a part of. And these are just photographs, okay, that were shared during his time there, okay? These were the beautiful photos shared, okay? And here's, of course, the celebration that Zelensky putting his fist up in solidarity with the NAZIs. This is something we've been talking about on this channel for quite some time. All right, so Canada is no stranger harboring NAZI war criminals that they conveniently call displaced persons. Why did Canada go out of their way to take 2,000 Ukrainian NAZIs that were being screened by Britain? Canada has always been at war with Russia. And here's an excerpt about Operation Paperclip, which was a CIA operation, and Canada was a willing participant, okay? Also note that Stepan Bandera's grandson, Stephen Bandera, is a Canadian journalist and producer who has covered the conflict at length. While he admires and speaks on behalf of his grandfather, he cannot tell you what his grandfather thought of the Jews. And here you have a quote from him. Bandera said he was unable to tell firsthand experience what his grandfather thought about Jews. However, he told Jewish Telegraph Agency, in the quote, anti-Soviet activism of my dad, there are a lot of Jewish colleagues and allies, and his father made an effort reaching out, working together with Jews that were on the same page, essentially Zelensky's, right? If you were like Vladimir Zelensky, then you were a good Jewish person. You were a fascist who would fight against the Soviets. So this is who Canada was celebrating. But it gets worse, okay? It gets worse because that lays out just what Canada, Trudeau, Anthony Rota, they're trying to say it was all Rota, nobody knew. And here's a report, okay, from The Guardian, says Canada's House Speaker apologized after praising Ukrainian veteran of a Nazi unit. Jewish groups voiced anger over a standing ovation for Yaroslav Hunka, 98, after Volodymyr Zelensky's speech in Canada's parliament. Canada has become embroiled in escalating political controversy after members of its House of Commons were encouraged to join in a standing ovation for an individual who fought in Ukraine with a Nazi military unit accused of war crimes during the Second World War. The ovation took place shortly after Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky delivered an address to the parliament on Friday, when the Assembly Speaker Anthony Rota called lawmakers' attention to 98-year-old Yaroslav Hunka, whom he described as a war hero who fought for the 1st Ukrainian Division. Images from the parliament show Zelensky and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau standing and applauding Hunka, and that was condemned by Jewish groups. As lawmakers cheered, Zelensky raised his fist in acknowledgement of Hunka and saluted from the gallery during 2 separate standing ovations, okay? And so Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, said the episode was clearly unacceptable, adding that it was deeply embarrassing for the Parliament of Canada and by extension to all Canadians. So the 1st Ukrainian Division was better known as Waffen-SS Galakia Division, or the SS 14th Waffen Division, a volunteer unit that was under the command of the Nazis. The decision to allow 600 members of the division to live in Canada after the Second World War has long been a source of controversy in Canada, and that was the subject of a government commission of inquiry in the 1980s onto whether Canada had become a haven for war criminals. Members of the division were accused of killing Polish and Jewish civilians. The Nuremberg tribunals found the Waffen-SS guilty as an organization of war crimes, but not the Galakia Division. So they were basically apologized for. They were protected. That's how that should be seen. They were protected, and the United States and Canada and Western countries had a huge role in that. So I want to show you how embarrassing this really is, because as they were trying to deny that this was a government decision, right? They're trying to say that it was just Rota who didn't know, right? That this was some kind of freak accident that they had no control over. Well, DD Geopolitics once again bursts this bubble. Well, this is awkward. The Speaker of the Canadian Parliament barely had time to take full responsibility for inviting SS veteran Yaroslav Hunka, saying Trudeau and Zelensky had nothing to do with it. When reporters found a Friday post from the granddaughter, actually, it's the daughter-in-law of the Nazi Teresa Hunka. Dato is waiting in the reception hall for Trudeau and Zelensky, the caption says. It would seem that these two not only applauded him in the parliament, but also had a personal meeting with him. And here is the Facebook post, which was deleted the same day, showing him waiting for Zelensky and Trudeau. And here's the post here, Teresa Hunka. NATO is waiting in the reception hall for Trudeau and Zelensky. He is so delighted to be there. Most kind of Anthony Rota to do this. But of course, we know that if Zelensky and Trudeau were going to meet, well, then that means obviously that there was more to this than just Rota accidentally making an oopsie, okay? Oh, Canada, this is not just an embarrassment, but it is part and parcel of a larger problem that has afflicted the collective West since the end of World War II, and that has played a huge role in the Ukraine proxy war, which is the love affair between the United States and its collective West vassals without and out fascists. This love affair is one of convenience. It's also one of alignment politically, militarily, economically, and it is also one that is driving the conflict in Ukraine, because these are the forces militarily, these are the forces politically that are in control. I don't care about if there's a number discrepancy, and you can't put a number on the broad swath of how many people exactly are NAZIs in Ukraine. The point is that they are the driving ideological, military, and political force. Their anti-Russia, their hatred of Russia, their service, their political influence is outsized. And that has been the case since the beginning of the Ukraine conflict. But this has been a problem that the United States and the collective West have been nurturing for so long as one of political convenience since the Cold War. This is a reality. This is part of history. The United States and the West, they wanted to attack the Soviet Union 4 years after the end of World War II. The atom bomb was to scare the Soviet Union and show the Soviet Union the US's military superiority through this bomb. So it is no wonder that anti-Soviet, anti-Russian forces like the NAZIs were convenient to use in their research, in their political programs, in intelligence, and the like. And that has been a reality for many decades, over 70 years now. So I want to show you what Brian Berletic had to say about this. A friend of the show, he will certainly be back on in early October, but I want to show you what he had to say about this, because I think he had some good insights, and then we will continue from there. So here we go.
Let's talk about what happened in the Canadian Parliament. So Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky traveled to Canada. He gave a speech in front of Canada's Parliament, and then the Speaker of the Parliament had his own comments to make. And as he was talking about World War II, he introduced a World War II veteran, who he himself said fought the Russians. He's a Ukrainian who fought the Russians in World War II, which means he is a Nazi, very clearly. If you know nothing else about World War II, let's look at Wikipedia. If you know nothing else about World War II, and you just glance at Wikipedia's entry on World War II, you read nothing of the actual article. Forget that. You could spend hours and hours reading all of that. If you just looked at this right here, this basic summary of World War II, and you go down to participants, if you didn't already know this, you see who the main Allied leaders were. It includes Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union, which includes Russia, Franklin D. Roosevelt of the United States, Winston Churchill of the United Kingdom, who the Canadian head of parliament actually mentioned and was talking about. And they were fighting against the Axis, which included Adolf Hitler of Nazi Germany, Emperor Hirohito of the Empire of Japan, and Benito Mussolini of Italy. This was the Axis. These were the allies. So if you were fighting against Russia, it meant you had to be at least one of these. And it turned out that this Ukrainian veteran that they then all gave a standing ovation to, turned out that he was actually a Nazi, a literal Nazi, who at one point had to do the Hail Hitler salute to actual Adolf Hitler when he was still alive, either in principle or in person. And I want you to watch the segment of this event hosting Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. I want you to watch it, see it, and hear it for yourself to truly appreciate what just took place in the Canadian Parliament. And again, it wasn't as if the head of the Canadian Parliament thought that he was a World War II vet who fought the Nazis, and then it turned out later he was a Nazi. He himself introduced him as someone who fought the Russians, which meant he had to have been a Nazi. Let's listen.
Your words today also remind us of another world leader who addressed both our houses during the time of war. In December 1941, during World War II, the British Prime Minister, Sir Winston Churchill, traveled to Ottawa and delivered an impassioned speech on behalf of his people to rally for the continued support for his country at war. It was a defining moment of history and one that must never be forgotten. We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98.
So you're telling me that nobody in Canada's parliament, including Justin Trudeau, knew who this guy actually was, and now we know that Trudeau met with him beforehand? This shows how so-called neoliberals, neocons, how they are not different from fascists. They are not apart from fascists. They are not better than fascists. They are not somehow distinguishable from NAZIs, from Nazis, that they are inseparably linked. Look at that ovation. Listen to this ovation. I mean, it's going and on and on, and it is continuing on and on. Listen to that ovation. That is exactly what we all need to see. We need to see that, and that's why that's why the public relations sphere, the Western mainstream media, they are going crazy about this because it exposes a dirty little secret that is actually not so secret anymore.
His name is Yaroslav Hunka. And I was going to say he's in the gallery, but I think you beat me to that. But I'm very proud to say that he is from North Bay and from my riding of Nipissing-Temiskaming. He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service. Thank you.
Do you see how happy they are? I mean, look, I don't know who this person is. I don't know much about Canadian politics, but even just look how happy look, they are so happy that this is going on. And as Brian said, you don't even have to know much about World War II. You don't have to know much about World War II. I would say that probably most people in Canada, most people in the collective West don't know much about World War II. But if you have even if you just listened in history class when you were in school, or if you went on Wikipedia like Brian Berletic did, you can at least see who was on each side. And if you look at who was on the so-called Axis side, if you look at who, well, let's say who was against the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Unions were on the Allied side, mind you. If you look at that, then you know that that whole chunk was considered in the fascist camp, whether you're talking about Japanese fascism or you're talking about Nazism. So the fact that they are so happy and they're clapping and they're celebrating so publicly just goes to show what was always the truth. It's a mask-off moment. It is just demonstrative of how the collective West doesn't just collaborate with fascism. The collective West is the seeds of fascism. And if you know anything about what led up to the events that led up to World War II, you know the collective West was actually helping support and wanted, as long as Nazism, as long as Hitler, as long as these far-right NAZI, Nazi fascist forces across the world were not affecting them, it was okay. And that's why a lot of big monopolists, corporatists, capitalists, that's why they supported Hitler's cause for a very long time, up until he started to bring the war to Western Europe. So let's continue.
And then following this section of the speech, he then began lecturing everyone in the Canadian Parliament about Western democracy. And let's be honest, genuine democracy requires an informed electorate. And if the head of the Canadian Parliament is this profoundly ignorant about something like World War II, who the participants were, and he, accidentally invited a literal Nazi into the Canadian Parliament and gave him a standing ovation, what does that tell you about the intellectual capacity of Western leaders right now in the West? And we keep hearing about how Nazis in Ukraine is a Russian propaganda talking point. If you mention this, if you bring this up, you're just repeating Russian propaganda. But we keep seeing these accidents happening over and over again. When the Western media goes into Ukrainian-held territory, they take videos or pictures of Ukrainian soldiers and they're covered in Nazi symbols. And now, what's the chance that you invite a World War II veteran to the Canadian Parliament? It turned out he was an actual Nazi. I mean, what are the chances of that happening accidentally? Unless Ukraine has a serious Nazi problem. And the other thing we always hear is that Ukraine cannot possibly have a Nazi problem because their president, Volodymyr Zelensky, is Jewish. Well, let's watch the video again and see what Jewish president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, did when the Canadian head of parliament introduced a World War II veteran who was fighting the Russians. Let's see what his reaction was. Standing and clapping for a literal Nazi.
I want to stop it there in order to elaborate on the point that Brian is making here. Because not only did he, that because the video was quite blurry, it almost looked like a Heil signal, mind you. But of course, we saw the pictures earlier of the fist as well go up. Regardless if it's a fist or a Heil or whatever, it still shows Zelensky is very much in solidarity with fascists and with Nazis. I mean, that's been the case since the beginning of this conflict. It's been quite clear that was the case. And, given that Ukraine's military is heavily reliant on the spirit, the energy, and the leadership of Azov and forces like it, well, that's just the reality. That's how this conflict has been fought since the beginning. But this is a problem that was acknowledged by the collective West in Ukraine for quite a long time. As Brian said, that, this all indicates, and we're always told that we are agents of Russia if we are pointing out that Ukraine has a problem when it comes to fascism, when it comes to Nazis, when it comes to Nazism and neo-Nazism. We're called the Putin puppets, that we are on the side of Russia. But the reality is that the collective West themselves was saying this. And I always like to pull this up. They were saying this for years, since the 2014 coup especially, but not even exclusively. Let me pull up this. Western media before February 2022. These are not all the headlines, but many of the headlines that are saying and indicating and talking about and analyzing and proving that Ukraine indeed has a problem with Nazism. This is historic in nature. The Bandera movement, the Banderites, these forces didn't necessarily go away. In fact, the collective West has empowered them since the end of World War II. They've empowered them to, at the very least, remain politically relevant in order to fight a Cold War, first against the Soviet Union and now against the Russian Federation via the Ukraine proxy war. And look at these headlines. The Times of Israel, Ukraine celebrates Nazi collaborator, bans books critical of pogrom's leaders. Here you have a 2014 article, far-right fighters from Europe fight for Ukraine. Here you have a Haaretz article from 2018, Ukraine designates national holiday to commemorate Nazi collaborator. Here you have an article from 2018, Bretons join neo-Nazi militia in Ukraine. The Atlantic Council, Ukraine's got a real problem with far-right violence. And no, RT didn't write this headline. That was the Atlantic Council in 2018, NATO's think tank. Here you have Bellingcat. Yes, it's still okay to call Ukraine C-14 neo-Nazi. That's from 2019. So on and on. BBC, Ukraine underplays role of far-right in the conflict. So again, this is all mainstream Western media. This has been a truth, a reality that even the collective West has acknowledged. But after 2022 of February, all of that went away. Talking about this issue, bringing it up is enough to get you labeled simply a Russian puppet, smeared, and you can be censored, you can be demonetized, whatever it is. But nonetheless, the facts are the facts, and the facts haven't changed just because the collective West wants to exploit, wants to empower these forces against Russia because it's really all they have in terms of skill and energy. These are forces with battlefield experience, obviously. They were the ones trying to defeat the Allied forces, in large part led by the Soviet Union, although, of course, many in the collective West don't want to hear this. So this was a real embarrassing moment for Canada. Obviously, Canada has a real problem with this, harboring these kinds of forces, but it, of course, is much bigger than that. This is really, when you talk about Canada, you cannot talk about Canada without talking about the United States. The United States essentially operates Canadian foreign policy. It has been doing so for many, 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 many decades. There really isn't any conflict there. And that's because the United States has wielded its influence as the so-called superpower over its collective West so-called allies in order to get what it wants. And here in Ukraine, what the United States has wanted from the very beginning is to defeat Russia by any means necessary. And so what are some of those means? Well, some of those means are empowering and supplying, funding, and arming the most despicable and heinous war criminals on the face of this earth that stem from the scourge of Nazism. That has been the truth from the very beginning, no matter how much it is censored, how much it is decried, rejected by the ruling elites, by the neocons in the collective West, by all those who seek to promote outright lies, to whitewash these kind of forces in order to stick a needle or slam a hammer on the back of the Russian bear. No matter how much they try to do this, it cannot be hidden. And this was a mask-off moment when it comes to Canada's role. Of course, it's happening across the collective West. The United States is trying its best to distance itself from the worst of this and has the ability through its hegemonic position in this collective West imperial sphere to distance itself, despite the fact that it is the main arbiter, it is the agent fueling these forces at the moment. But when it comes to Europe, when it comes to Canada, they have taken the attack dog role. And so this, as part of Trudeau's legacy, and Trudeau has a very checkered history now, right? Trudeau just is now having problems with India for trying to treat India like some kind of colony that should be brought to heel based on this whole Sikh assassination issue, right? going after India, obviously, for its role in BRICS, and it's saying that, oh, it has Five Eyes intelligence that there was an assassination that India conducted, and now it should be punished for that. It should be held accountable. These are the words not of an independent government or foreign policy. These are the words of a mouthpiece for U.S. foreign policy, a foreign policy that is heavily reliant on the worst of the worst, the most criminal, the most fascistic, the most outright fascist forces. This is a long-standing foreign policy that is all about, I mean, this is how it's been, and this is why U.S. empire, this is why the U.S. foreign policy establishment, the neocons, the neoliberals, these forces are so dangerous, is because they will do anything they can to ensure the defeat of Russia, to ensure the defeat of China, to somehow win in their fantasies going on in their minds this war that they are building against both, and they will use any means to do so, including empowering the worst of the worst, potentially to the point where these forces once again take leadership. Ukraine is an example of how that actually could happen because they did. There's holidays celebrating them. There's street signs that have been changed. There are far-right, outright fascist political parties with influence in parliament. And of course, on the military front, they are the most energetic, the most influential, and the most important within Ukraine's National Guard, its battalions, etc. Azov has been the burning spear of what has been, of course, a complete and utter failure of this Ukraine proxy war. But they have been at the front lines. They have been the ones who have been bearing the brunt of the fighting. They're the ones who actually bring the energy. They have fighting experience. And that is why Russia says denazification. This is a good example that affirms Russia. It's these kind of moves that again show how bankrupt the collective West is in Ukraine. And I'm guessing that we're going to see more of this in the very near future. Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.